We're here for another episode of CleanTech Talk. I'm Zach Shahan, CEO of CleanTechnica, and joining us today is Hunter McDaniel, CEO and founder of UbiQD, spelled UbiQD, Ubiquity. So they've got some pretty huge news about an agreement with First Solar uh, that we're going to get into as we get into the podcast. But as always, I like to start with a little bit on the interviewee's background, which of course today is Hunter. Hunter, what's your background leading into Ubiquity, and how did it lead you to this role?
Hey Zach, happy to be here. So I am a technical founder. Was kind of on a career path to become a professor, if you will, or a research scientist until I made this pivot about 11 years ago into startup land. And yeah, my background's in physics, electrical engineering, and then I got a PhD in material science. And that opened up an opportunity for me to come to Los Alamos National Laboratory. And Los Alamos is where the company's based here in New Mexico. I was working in this field of quantum dots, which I can talk about what those are in a second if you're not familiar, for my PhD thesis. And then for my postdoc, we developed some patents while I was at Los Alamos. And there was kind of an opportunity to spin that out into a company. And that's what Ubiquity is. And Ubiquity, although it's a bit of a tongue twister, is short for ubiquitous quantum dots, with this notion that once you've got a very safe, low cost quantum dot, it could and would be widely used. So we position as kind of the leader in all things outside of quantum dots for display, taking the technology into new markets with some novel compositions and applications.
Sounds good. Yeah, we've covered quantum dot solar cells a number of times, although it's been a while. I feel like this was more like
Hmm.
a decade or more back that we were covering this from time to time. Might well have been what you were doing. Might have been we might have been covering you back then. I have to search it out better. But yeah, as you say, I mean, we talked about the potential of lower cost solar cells and
Hmm.
yeah. Translating something that had been very effective and useful in a display market into a solar PV market. So, yeah, I guess explain a little bit more what they are and yeah, how you kept going on this path of hey, this could really be a solution for the market.
There's a lot of ways you can use quantum dots and a lot of ways you can use quantum dots in solar. And I have some papers when I was at University of Illinois for my PhD and at Los Alamos on quantum dot solar cells, different kinds of quantum dot solar cells. And so you might have been covering um, something related to how quantum dots are used to basically create a completely new type of solar cell. You can do that. You can use them as like the semiconductor layer, and there's the potential or the promise for very low cost because it's a liquid phase sort of semiconductor that you could, people talked about like painting solar panels onto like a substrate with this like kind of fantasy almost that you could like paint your walls and then they generate electricity. So that was one reason why people got excited is it's like very low cost and simple. The other reason is that there's some novel physics that come from these quantum confined, very small semiconductors, and that can lead to higher efficiency. So there's been some papers and some research groups focus on how you can use quantum dots to make ultimately a higher efficiency type of solar panel. In our case, we're not doing any of those, I would say, much more exotic use cases. We just, all of our applications actually are light in, light out. So we're converting a spectrum into of light, like a color of light, into a new spectrum, into a new color. And so that massaging, if you will, of color can make something work more effectively. We're doing this in agriculture by shifting the spectrum of sunlight to be more aligned with chlorophyll. Chlorophyll absorbs the strongest in the red. So if you give plants more red light, they can grow more effectively. Not, it depends. There's some nuances to that, but solar panels are similar. They can convert certain colors more efficiently than other colors, depends on the type of solar panel. And so we just sort of sit in front of the panel, if you will, like between the sunlight and the solar panel, either on the back or the front, to make the spectrum more effective for the panel. And this is all because quantum dots have this notorious ability for being able to be their optical properties can be tuned with their size. In the past, if you wanted to make a certain color of material, like the red ink, in on a piece of art or something, or the blank ink on a newspaper, you'd need a new compound to make different colors. But with quantum dots, you can tune the color by changing the size of the particles. So it's a platform for being able to optimize color in a continuous way. The same compound can be used to make a whole rainbow of colors by just making slightly different sizes for each color of the particles. So they're vanishingly small particles of semiconductor that are effective at manipulating light.
Cool stuff. Yeah, I was just doing a little bit of searching while you were talking, and we have covered them quantum dots about 20 times in the past 15 years, going back 15 years.
Wow.
I found one article from I think 11 years ago
Mm-hmm.
that was referencing Los Alamos National Laboratory research
Yeah.
on this, but I don't see your name in there. But I'm sure you know who was working on that, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe you were on that team as well. But yeah, it's been an interesting, of course, going through those archives too. A lot of fun pictures of colorful, colorful graphics. But yeah, there's so many things that we've covered over the years, from labs, from research institutes. We're just like, oh, this is really exciting, really interesting, but naturally doesn't normally end up leading anywhere commercially, as far as commercial
Mm-hmm.
products. That's just the nature of how things work, of course. But the big news here, the huge deal, is that you've got an agreement with First Solar, and First Solar has been one of the largest solar PV manufacturers in the world uh, for ages. I think for decades even.
Mm-hmm.
And it's traditionally it's produced thin film CDTE solar panels, solar PV, that's different from the conventional crystalline silicone PV. And it's quite a wonder, actually, that it's survived and thrived, because that
Mm-hmm.
the cost of conventional crystalline solar PV came down so much from economies of scale, from scaling up, from learning curve, that almost everything else died that tried to compete with it. So First Solar persisted, survived. It's doing well, still a top solar PV manufacturer. So what can you tell us about how it's trying to, I mean, of course, not stepping on too many toes, but how it's trying to adapt and innovate and stay relevant as well, and what this partnership, how this partnership helps with that.
Yeah, I mean, just to talk to First Solar about them for a second, I've been a fan of that company for many years, maybe 15 years, as like a great example of how materials innovation can translate into, market business success. They had this semiconductor that was better than silicon in many ways. It absorbs light like 100 times more strongly, so you need a lot less of that material, and that means you can deposit it much faster. In principle, it can be a lot lower cost and higher efficiency, but you're competing with the economies of scale with silicon, these massive factories, mostly in China, that can, even though silicon solar panels sort of cost more, certainly take more energy to manufacture, because the scale is so huge. It's tough to compete. It's tough to catch up with that. But First Solar's done an amazing job, and they're not only one of the largest producers and still around, they're by a huge margin the most profitable. So a lot of those silicon guys just aren't making money. They're selling at cost. There's this commoditized industry. But First Solar has been able to maintain a pretty healthy profit margin, and because of that, their stock has done well, and because of that, their market cap is the largest. So by market cap, the value of the company, First Solar is the largest. But in terms of their like deployment of material or solar panels, I think they're like the third or so largest. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of about competition here. They're competing with China, and our technology helps them stay competitive, improves the efficiency. But it's also about, every watt matters, if you will, when it comes to solar these days. The scale is so huge and the demand is so high for electricity with AI and electric vehicles that they're trying to squeeze every little watt they can get out of a panel. And, we make a pretty meaningful impact on it without any change to their manufacturing process.
That's a great background and overview. I love that. Yeah, there were a handful of years there where I feel like a new solar PV manufacturer would rise to number one globally, and then within the next year it would be bankrupt. And it was just
Yeah.
happened with a series of companies. And then And it's continued to be the case. It's like hyper cutthroat, really low cut. I think they seem to get a little bit more practical and responsible about it, so that there wasn't a major company going bankrupt every year. But it's still, like you said, commoditized market, except for First Solar, which has had this strong R&D emphasis, strong like technological innovation emphasis, which honestly, covering clean tech for over 15 years, First Solar stands out as kind of an astounding exception to a lot of
Hmm.
rules, because it's been able to survive and thrive in markets that commoditize more or less, and really, I mean, it's amazing story. I'm sure there should be books written about it, and you could probably write one or two of those much better than I could. But yeah, it's a great background. Interesting that you highlight their market cap and profit margin too. So yeah, let's talk a little bit more. I mean, I know you got into it, but can you talk a little bit more about how your solution, how your technology helps it?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we focus on light in, light out. So it's just about massaging the spectrum of light that's hitting the solar panel. And more specifically, relates to bifaciality. So with this emphasis on pushing the efficiency higher, solar module manufacturers have been developing ways to collect light from both sides. And that's called a bifacial solar panel. With silicon, it's all the same material, more or less. It's all silicon. And so if you flip it upside down, it's sort of symmetric because it's one material, and either way, you're the same material. But with a thin film semiconductor like the cadmium telluride, CadTel, as they say, that First Solar makes, there's an asymmetry. There's two different materials there that create the junction. So when you flip it upside down, the light sort of passes through those layers in the wrong order. So their bifaciality is worse. It doesn't perform as good as the silicon stuff. And these huge solar farms are being sort of prioritized more and more based on the reflectivity of the ground to reflect light back into the solar panel from the backside. So that's where we come in. It's because of that asymmetry on the backside, there's only a certain band of photons that are efficiently converted. The other photons end up getting kind of absorbed in the wrong order in the wrong place. And so what we do is we kind of intercept those photons, if you will, and shift them over to that band where the efficiency is much higher. And so it's a lot to ask of the quantum dots, really. We're trying to absorb almost all of the sunlight that we can on the backside and then push that energy all over into this narrower band. And that's what quantum dots are kind of known for, is you can shift the color and tune it right to the sweet spots. So you can optimize for these use cases. Like I was talking about greenhouses before, chlorophyll has a very narrow peak in the red. They have a couple peaks, but we can really dial in the color to that specific peak. And the same thing with the solar panel. It's a different wavelength, but no problem for quantum dots really. You just need to tune it and optimize it. And they already have a stack there in their device where there's a polymer layer. It's kind of the glue that's holding together. It's a glass module, and they build the solar panel up on the first sheet of glass, but then they come in with a second sheet to complete it. And in between, there's this polymer, and it's in just the right spot really for us to do our thing. So we go into that polymer at a pretty low weight fraction, but it doesn't take a lot to absorb a ton of sunlight. And then if that fluorescence is then going down into the rest of the device. So it's a simple concept. When people talk about quantum dot solar cells, like you were asking about, and probably as you guys covered in the past, these are much more exotic. Like you're using the quantum dots in the solar panel directly, like as the semiconductor. So you have to think about transporting charges and the layers and multiple layers, and it gets to be complex like clean rooms and stuff. But in our case, it's just we mix the material into a polymer. That's really it. And then they can drop that same polymer. It's the same polymer they're already using. So they can drop that into their manufacturing process without changing anything. They already have to put that there. It's just that when they buy that polymer now, they need to buy it with our material already in it, a little bit of it already in there. So it's very simple. It can go big quickly. You just have to be able to make the dots, and that's where we're focused is scaling up the manufacturing of the dots. I think you're on mute, Zach. Maybe.
You are correct. That's the first time that's happened in a few years, I think, but it used to happen all the time. Yeah, no, it's really interesting, fascinating, actually. I think, and you say simple, but I think, for people not familiar with this, listening to it, it's like we have to listen very carefully and get our head around
Yeah.
the idea. But I was just wondering while you were talking about like how you must have felt when you were like, realizing, hey, we could do this with First Solar and, improve their technology, which, as you said, you were already a big fan of and, highly respected what they'd done. So how was that? Was anything interesting from, figuring that out and that process, how you felt?
Oh man, there's so many interesting things that came out of this. I wasn't aware of this problem at all. Like I had no idea that this issue existed with their bifacial panels, and you kind of have to have a PhD to understand where the problem comes from. How we solve it, we just make stuff glow. We just shift the color. So that seems simple, but understanding why they have that problem is a hard concept to wrap your head around. And it's still somewhat of a secret. I don't think that the world understands this problem. I feel like if they did, there'd be a whole bunch of other startups that got created just to try to solve that problem for solar because it's such a big
Right.
problem, such a
Right.
big opportunity. There's probably other ways you could attack it besides our approach. But it kind of gets into the philosophy of like starting a business, especially from a technical founder's perspective. We think we've got the solution out of the gate. We're not really sure what the problem is. Like just the name of the company gives you a hint of like where my head was at when I started the company. We had discovered this new kind of quantum dot. It's going to be useful in all these applications. It's going to be ubiquitous. So we're going to just like make this stuff, and there's going to be a line of people out the door waiting to buy it, right? And why are they
Yeah,
buying it? I don't know. Like because they want to make stuff glow, like obviously.
because it's
But
awesome.
it's backwards, right?
Yeah.
Technical founders are in love with the solution, right? We wrote a PhD thesis on it. We wrote all these papers, and we had a paragraph at the beginning of our paper talking about how it was super useful for all these things, but like no one cares about that paper. No one or that paragraph. No one's paying attention to that really, and we don't think it through. But as a company, you really have to fall in love with the problem. It just happened to
Yeah.
be that this is a technical founder funded a founded company, and I had a typical like solution first type approach. So we were kind of a solution fishing for problems for a while, and got pretty good at that, and ended up stumbling upon a bunch of use cases where we can solve a problem, and then had to focus kind of individually on each one by one to try to really dial in like can we solve this problem, like is it actually a pain point or not, um, are the unit economics there? Like, will this be profitable for us and them in this successful scenario? And First Solar was one where it was just pure serendipitous situation where they were asking around, like, does anybody have materials that emit light in this spectrum? And people were saying like, no, 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 but we know someone that might. And then they made an introduction to us, and we're like, we actually have some materials on the shelf right now that emit at that wavelength. You wanna try them out? Basically, like,
That's
we're
crazy.
already developing this for something else, but it might work for you guys too. And they just sort of tried it out, and it was like, whoa, that works pretty well. And then as I sort of studied that problem more and understood it better, I was like, wow, this is like, like you're digging in a field like randomly and you stumble upon like a treasure chest of like diamonds. Like, we didn't know this problem existed and that this opportunity was there. But once we found it, like once I really understood it, I was like, wow, this is something special. Like it's just a perfect match, our technology with their problem, and we're sort of off to the races at that point.
That's funny. Yeah, I can imagine when you've developed something really cool and awesome technology, you're like, okay, there's going to be people at companies all over the place, looking for this solution, but realistically, they're probably just like trying to get by,
Yeah,
make it to the
their
next
their
quarter.
pants are on fire. Like,
Yeah, their pants are on fire, and and
unless you
perhaps
got a hose, like like
yeah,
they don't care.
and they're not like blindly, they're not like just scanning the world for obscure solutions to problems that they even if they're aware of them, it's like how long can you be looking? What if there's no solution? You're looking, so it's just not probably. But as you're saying, like as a technology founder, you're just sitting there like, okay, people are just going to come to us without realizing you probably have to hold their hand and walk them through their own problem to their solution in a lot of cases, right? But it is it is funny when you bring up then for solar because I don't know, just covering the solar market. Like I said, we so much of the cost drop was just economies of scale, manufacturing in China bringing costs down as it got, the market got bigger and bigger, and it killed all kinds of technologies on the side. But then, yeah, bifacial solar PVs started getting quite a big deal, started getting more and more popular as just one way that conventional solar panels and solar farms could quite easily increase their output, their overall efficiency, their output.
Hmm.
But when you think about it, they must have been using quite crude solutions. They're just like, yeah, let's just stick some solar panels on the back. When you started talking about colors coming in different orders and whatnot, or what I forget how you worded that, I was like, whoa, this is wild. What does that mean? So, but it just makes sense that they would have some kind of crude solution that's not optimized for collecting sunlight from underneath panels,
Hmm.
and that there would be better ways to do that. But yeah, keep going. This was really really fun, interesting hearing how you got there with them.
Well, it's actually very similar to how quantum dots are helping out with display. The LCD TVs were kind of becoming obsolete. LCD is where you have a backlight, and the backlight goes through basically some filters, and then you can create the pixels one by one by turning each one on and off. And so you have this sort of inefficiency, a bunch of light in the back of the TV coming through, and then the colors are not very accurate because of these filters. And so there's this new technology, OLED, that where each pixel turns on and off. It's like its own LED, so it's more efficient and it's more expensive. But that was where the display industry was going. But quantum dots appeared in a way that enabled LCD TVs to start to be more effective. Like without getting into the details, you could drop in this simple film of quantum dots into a normal LCD TV, and now it looks almost as good as an OLED, but a lot lower cost. And they had already built up this capacity to manufacture LCDs in mostly in Asia, and so quantum dots sort of breathed new life into the LCD display industry and added another 10, 15 years for that technology. And I think it's sort of similar to what we're doing with First Solar. They're not changing their product at all. Their thin film solar cells work very well. They're just enabling them to be more efficient and competing with newer technologies coming from overseas primarily with this simple change. And that's sort of the bread and butter of quantum dots is that they can enhance like existing almost commoditized things. That's what we're doing in greenhouses. Like we add our material to this plastic film. It's just like a normal plastic film they cover a greenhouse with, but all of a sudden it behaves like a lighting product. Like you can install LEDs in a greenhouse, very expensive, very energy intensive. But with this small change, just adding a little bit of quantum dots to a polymer, you can make an old thing like new again, if you will, like more competitive. And that's part of the theme with First Solar is that we're just it's a simple modification that adds meaningful performance.
Yeah, and I think we'll get to other applications and scaling up in a moment. But I'm just curious, because I've known for a long time, First Solar has a very heavy R&D focus. They're heavily focused on the idea of being technological leaders, not just um, benefiting
Hmm.
from economies of scale or whatnot. How was it working with them? Did you just find that they had a really hands-on, active, high tech R&D team that was really stood out to you? And I know also regionally, they're based in the Southwest there, so the U.S. Southwest. So I don't know if you
Hmm.
had already links with them or had other connections or ideas in mind because you're regionally, located near each other.
Well, you're right. They're very innovative. They have a huge R&D budget. I think it's like between 100 150 million a year they spend on R&D, and they've got facilities all over the country. Their headquarters, I believe, is in Phoenix, but most of their operations are in at least like the epicenter of their operations is in Ohio. But they've got facilities in Northern California. They're building manufacturing sites in Alabama and Louisiana. So they're sort of spread out across the U.S. A lot of those are just straight up like manufacturing facilities, but they have a brand new R&D facility in Ohio. So their capabilities are pretty incredible to be able to test and develop, and they work beyond their core technology is the CAD, TEL, thin film uh, semiconductors, but they also do perovskites, and I think they do a bit of silicon as well. They're always trying to innovate in solar and stay ahead of the competition. And so working with them has been pretty fun. We have weekly calls, and we're on the call with very like-minded folks that are, scientists, have PhDs and, are experts at what they're doing. And along the way, we've had some interesting challenges that have come up. Like one of them, the way you normally characterize a solar cell, it's standardized across the whole industry doesn't work that well with this type of application. And the reason is that it's a test where you shine a very small spot of light on the device. It's a huge device, but you just test a small area, and then that's good enough to give you an indication across like a larger area. But in our case, when our material absorbs the light in that small spot, it diffuses it into the larger area because of the fluorescence, because our material glows, right? So at first we were thinking like this actually doesn't work that great. I mean, it works, but it's not like generating as much performance as we thought. And we had to scratch our heads for a little while, and just iterating and collaborating with them, we figured out that like this standard test condition doesn't work for this type of device. You have to either change that test condition or change the device itself to capture all of those photons that get diffused. And one of the things they noticed was like, we have the spot right here, but then if we measure the device over here, that one's actually generating current too. And they're like, how is that possible? We're not even shining light over there. It's because some of the photons from this spot ended up traveling, and you have to kind of add it all up. And in a module like in the field, this isn't an issue because it's all getting there's sunlight hitting the whole thing, and the light can
Right.
bounce around all at once. So yeah, we figured out like it's kind of we innovated on module testing with them, which is not
Yeah.
something I thought we would be finding
No.
ourselves in a position to do. I mean, for solar, if anyone knows how to test a module, it should be them, right? But
Yeah, well, I was
this
gonna say, I mean, they must have done so much testing over the years that they were able to sort of think about these things and, think about different testing they've done and other issues they've run into probably to help.
they just never had
But
light
they never
diffusing, like
but
photons bouncing around, like
yeah, but I mean, that's
like
the
that.
case of testing different new things, right? Is they break your old what you've learned in the past. Yeah,
So yeah, it's been really fun working with them.
that's very interesting. Yeah, I would love to be a fly on the wall on those meetings. But yeah, so one thing that I mean, there's many great inventions, many of which probably could really be greatly useful, but they just never made it from lab to mass production. Mass production is just it's a very hard thing to get from proving something in a lab, even finding something's really useful for a commercial product, but then getting to mass production and making it useful. So I imagine this is top of mind for you probably every day. Is like what's your plan? How are you going to get to mass production? And then what doors would that open up? Like what other opportunities, what other markets does that open up once you're mass producing what your side of that story? Could you talk a little bit more about that and just if any details that you have or any thoughts you have on scaling up and
Hmm.
reaching into new markets beyond this?
Traditionally, nanomaterials are difficult to scale because you need very controlled conditions to control the size. And the historic way to make quantum dots is that they call it hot injection. You have to mix two things together very quickly, and that causes the particles to nucleate, and then they start to grow into the right size, a few nanometers. And it's kind of they're vanishingly small. It's kind of hard to comprehend how small we're talking. I like to use the analogy of like the size of a golf ball to the Earth like if a golf ball sitting on the Earth is about the same as the ratio of a quantum dot to a golf ball. So if you put a quantum dot on a golf ball, it's like a golf ball on the Earth. So they're just super tiny, and being able to control that size can be challenging this is a liquid phase reaction. So we're mixing liquids, particles nucleate and grow. Our technology is a little bit different. We put everything in there at the beginning. And then as we heat it up, there's a temperature where when you get to that temperature, one of the sources of one of the precursors starts to decompose, and so that triggers the nucleation. That makes it a lot easier to scale up because all you're doing is you're heating and you're stirring. And it starts to seem or like act like a lot of other large scale chemical processes. So we've had a lot of success just making the reactors bigger. As you do that, you run into all sorts of other challenges like heating. How do you heat it quickly? How do you cool it quickly? How do you control the heating and cooling in a safe way? And just large volumes of, in some cases, the solvents can be flammable. You have to be really careful with that. But we started, when I was at the lab at Los Alamos, or maybe for my PhD, at around the 100 milliliter scale, so a tenth of a liter roughly. And then as I started the company, we started getting up to the like liter scale, like 1 liter. You can imagine like a Coke bottle or something like a liter. Um, and then as the demand has grown, we've scaled that up to 200 liters is the largest that we've produced with so far. The new facility, we're building out about a 2,000, 3,000, a couple of different reactor sizes vessels. So far so good. You just stir and heat and you cool it down at the end. And if you get the recipe right, then you have this very tight size distribution. All the particles are the same size, and we can tweak the recipe to make a certain color or another color, but it's relatively straightforward to make them at that point. Then you have to process, kind of purify, and then get them into a polymer. And there's some know-how and some work there to do that. But it's pretty standard so-called compounding, if you will. There's a lot of work that went into figuring out how to do that, but you basically just add the quantum dots into a melted polymer. There's these screws that are like mixing it, and then the powder kind of comes in, and at the end you've got this nice, if you do everything right, you got this nice glowing strand of material that can be chopped into pellets. And that's a standardized product in the polymer industry. It's so-called master batch. So it's not that bad. It's hard to imagine back in the day when they were making those Sony TVs, they were using this hot injection approach, and they had to just line up lots of small reactors because they couldn't make the volume couldn't be larger because you had to mix things together really quickly and heat and cool it super fast. So that's one of the benefits of our technology is it's easier to scale.
Yeah, funny, interesting. So you're not, yeah, too sure. You could see yourself, scaling tenfold, hundredfold with the process you have, and it should work. But of course, along the way, you would expect to find ways of improving efficiency and lowering costs. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and at some point, we do want to partner with larger chemical companies to help scale. We're building a factory right now. It remains TBD whether we would continue to just build our own capacity or, partner with some larger chemical companies that already have a lot of this tooling. Like it's a bit of a proof point for us to show that you can make the material at this scale. So that is a focus right now. But in the longer run, yeah, I could see us partnering with other chemical companies to scale up, and us
Yeah.
being more of like a technology source, developing the technology, proving it, but then handing it off for manufacturing.
Yeah, it's a whole different world to go from, yeah, what you're doing to being a major manufacturer. I think many people, we love the idea of keeping it in-house and, vertically integrating or whatever, just growing and becoming a new big player. But of course, how markets work, that's seldom the case, and it just makes more sense often to start partnering it and keeping it to your very nice, effective, part of the business of the market. Interesting stuff. And as far as other markets, like that you might, right now partnering with First Solar for solar panels, solar cells, but yeah, do you have your eyes specifically on any other markets that you would like to get into?
Well, for the next 2 or 3 years, we expect that the greenhouse opportunity is going to be on par with the solar opportunity. The solar opportunity can kind of just continue to grow and get bigger. But for the greenhouse one, I talked a little bit about it. It's similar. We're just adjusting the spectrum of sunlight, but instead of doing it for a solar panel, we're doing it for a plant. And plants have an absorption spectrum. That's why they look green. Basically, they don't absorb green light very strongly, and you end up perceiving the green because that light's reflected, whereas the red and blue light is absorbed more strongly. So there's There's a more interesting spectral response, I guess, for plants. So arguably, there's more opportunity for us to help. And in that case, it's covering the roofs of greenhouses with a quantum dot infused film. We have a couple different versions of it. We have one where you can put it inside of a greenhouse and it just hangs up, kind of like a passive lighting fixture. And then we've got a couple different products. We have one that's designed more for like home gardening. And this is under our UbiGro. It's the same UBI and then GRO instead of Ubiquity. Believe it or not, Ubiquity wasn't resonating with farmers
Yeah.
like we wanted. So we
So
came up with
definitely.
UbiGro, and that they love that one. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ubiquity definitely sounds like something from Silicon Valley, and I can imagine.
So we had to do a lot of heavy lifting there because this is a completely new concept. You know, with the solar application, we're just dropping into a product that already exists, and we've got a partner there that's like leading the charge, if you will, and we supply and work with them. But with the greenhouse technology, UbiGrow, we're creating a whole new category in agriculture, which is like fluorescence and using fluorescence to make plants grow more effectively. Lighting is used, but it's kind of a niche, you know, only in like very northern climates or for certain crops that have to be grown indoors in warehouses and stuff. Lighting was developed as a way, vertical farming as well. Like if you want to have layers of plants, you need to create new layers of light along the way. So lighting is used in agriculture, but it's very expensive. You know, you're converting electrons into, calories basically, and that's not a very efficient, cost-effective thing to do, especially for staple crops. So
Yeah,
that line of products is something where we're creating a whole new like category, and it wasn't the intention to build like, a whole brand around that. We just sort of looked ourselves in the mirror one day and we're like, well, we've already developed the relationships with the farmers. We figured out how to make this stuff. We might as well just sell it. And, that's a nice place to be in a way because then you understand your customers better, right? You're right there, sorry for the pun, in the weeds with them. And, we go to greenhouses a lot talking to the growers and we've adjusted the product over time. So being able to sell directly to them, although it's a pain, also to sell directly to farmers, it's a blessing as well because you get to learn, and the demand there can be in the tens of tons. The initial facility we're building is 100 metric ton. This new facility is about 100 metric ton of quantum dots per year, and that's mostly for First Solar. But there's also this growing opportunity in the tens of tons range for greenhouse films. So that's the other big one for us. And then it is a platform, so there's a lot of other use cases some that we're working actively on, some that we've thought about that may appear. Anytime light's being utilized by a thing, or you see a color, quantum dots might be able to make that better, might be able to make it more efficient.
yeah,
So
super
it's pretty
interesting.
interesting.
It does get confusing, and I think that last statement of yours helps. Yeah, helps to sort of capture the essence. I was going back to solar. I wasn't going to go back, but I'm curious because I kept leaning towards saying, working with for solar on their solar panels, and then I was correcting myself saying solar cells. But when I went back and tried to remember exactly how you explained it, it is more of a panel level solution or more of a cell level solution.
Well,
It's
it's with silicon, they're making these wafers, right? So you have an ignot, it's a big single crystal of silicon, and they slice it into wafers. And that is a solar cell, basically. And then they put those down in a tiled way to make a solar panel. And that's why we think of like a solar panel versus a solar cell. But with First Solar, it's not like that. They have a big sheet of glass, like a very large sheet of glass, and they coat the whole thing with a single layer or multiple layers actually, but layer of semiconductor that's continuous. And then they do need to pattern it into individual cells. It has to do with the voltage and current. You need to have higher voltage coming out, and to do that, you have to connect them in the right way. If you just had the whole thing one big solar cell, it would create some other issues. So they pattern it with like a laser, basically. As this thing is going down the conveyor belt, then their laser comes in and draws these lines on it, and that makes the individual cells. So it's really all one big thing that gets patterned into smaller things, as opposed to like a silicon one where they're making these individual things and then tiling them together. And we don't really affect either way. I mean, because we're just a sort of polymer. We're a homogeneous layer that goes over everything, and we don't have any patterning in what we do.
Yeah.
It's the
Well,
same everywhere.
well, that's what I was going back to because you're mixing with the polymer, and then that's getting laid on the panel level, right? I mean that like
Yeah.
after the solar
Well,
cells have been what laser created or whatever, however you say it,
yeah. Yeah, scribed is I think what they laser
described.
scribed. Just cut lines basically in the material with a laser. But because our technology is a fluorescence, right? It's glowing. The polymer is glowing. We actually sort of mix the photons around in the device too, which is an interesting effect.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily good or bad per se, but we can move a photon from one solar cell to another one. It's kind of okay in the module. Like if the photons bounce around, it doesn't really matter as long as they get absorbed eventually. But like I was talking about, that technique for characterizing solar cells can miss those photons that get diffused around. So it's the same but different. Really no change in the manufacturing other than they have to get that film with our dots, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. And for a startup, we just want to keep it as simple as possible. We don't want to we can't ask much of your downstream customers. They can't be asked to change what they do. We've learned that a lot from the farmers as well. They're not going to change the way that they grow, or not going to change the way that they construct a greenhouse to use our technology. We have to drop into what they already do.
Yeah, yeah, they must have been thrilled. I mean, pardon the pun, but they must have been thrilled to just find like a plug and play solution where it's like, okay, we just substitute this.
It's a lot
Yeah,
lower cost than lighting. And that's something
yeah,
that's been frustrating because they can see the benefits of lighting. Their neighbor might be using it, or there's papers about it, but then they go to purchase the LEDs, the light bulbs, and they're like, oh my gosh, like it's just out of reach.
yeah,
Maybe they don't even have the electricity, like they can't power those lights because they don't have enough grid infrastructure. And ours doesn't require any electricity. It's pretty
yeah.
simple.
Yeah. Well, a final topic for me. So you mentioned nanotech a couple of times, and funny enough, like I was interviewing a nano uh, tech scientist engineer 2 podcasts ago, not published yet, and
Hmm.
it just brought up this weird this weird situation that happened like I think several years ago now, uh, where it's totally off topic, but I'm just curious to first get your take. What is nanotechnology? What is nanotech? Is what? How would you explain it or describe it?
Well, the simplest way to say it is that it's at the nanometer scale, which doesn't mean anything to most people. I always forget. Like, for me, a nanometer, I have a pretty good idea what a nanometer is, but like, it's so small that it's kind of out of reach to think about. Like, what does that mean? But that's just the literal definition, right? Nanotech, nanometer. But the way I describe it is, it's a new vector in materials optimization. In the past, if you wanted to control the properties of a material, like you're trying to achieve some, I'm using the color as an example because that's where we focus, but it could be like other properties like, mechanical properties or electronic properties. To make a new property, you need a new compound. So you need to combine elements in a new way, like a new ratio of different elements or a new combination of new crystal, whatever it is, a new dye molecule. You have to make a new molecule to make a new property. But with nano, when you make materials at that size scale, you can start to impart new properties by just changing the size and shape of particles. Or it could be different types of structures, but the size and the shape starts to matter. If you take a piece of silicon, like, macro scale, and chop it in half, they both have exactly the same properties. You chop it in half again, still the same properties. If you did that enough times, you'd eventually get down to like the size scale of an electron. Like now the electron isn't like able to move around. It's like getting squeezed because the the piece of silicon is so small that it starts to squeeze the electron. So the material starts to develop new properties. So nanotechnology, from my perspective, is basically where you're controlling properties through size and shape now, not just composition. And that gives you the ability to tune by controlling size or shape. And so that's what quantum dots really are, is particles where we control the size, and then that changes the color. And that doesn't really work at large scale, but at a small scale, if you're small enough, 5 nanometers, if you make it's like, imagine like a golf ball is like, say, a green, but if you make it into a marble size, it's like blue. Or if you make it into like a tennis ball size, it turns red. It's the same, those are different materials, I guess. But let's say they were all the same golf ball material, just different sizes, the color would change. So that's pretty cool because it creates a platform. Like in our case, we're buying the same precursors, raw materials, we're using the same reactors, but we're making different colors. So it's a slight change in the way you think about materials innovation, materials manufacturing, and that's what nano enables. It's quantum and it's nano.
It's fascinating. I'm glad I asked because that was really interesting. Yeah, interesting way of describing it, talking about it. Yeah, it was uh, it was just to give you the back. So I don't know if you heard of this guy Elon Musk. You might have heard of him before, but
I heard
he
his
got it.
name before.
He got into some like Twitter fight with this nanoscientist. Like I don't remember how long ago it was, 7 to 10 years ago, probably, or something like maybe less. I don't know, but he was just claiming that there's no such thing as nanotechnology or nanoscience, and this nanoscientist was like, "What are you talking about? Like this is my field, you know." So it ended up this weird kind of Twitter argument. I always just sort of thought of it like, okay, it's a like you said, nanometer scale. So you're doing stuff like I just thought of it at a scale, like you're working with stuff on that scale, whatever that stuff is. I'm not a nanoscientist, I don't know, but the way you just described it is quite fascinating. And I guess there are different takes. The guy I was interviewing a couple episodes ago was sort of focusing on how carbon nanotubes became a popular topic that was getting discussed in a lot of fields, and he sort of saw that as what it was relating to. But
It's sort of a coincidence that it happens to be at the nano scale. Like it could have easily been like micro technology or something, or it could be atto technology. It just at the nano scale is sort of where you get into these quantum effects. That's where you start to squeeze the electron. It's just it happens to be at a nanometer, and that became the buzzword. Small scale things also, you can put them into liquids. They have very high surface area. So there's some other chemistry and properties that become possible. Like we can put quantum dots into a liquid. I don't have one on my desk here, but like it would just look like a glowing liquid to you. But they're solid particles, they're crystals in there. They're just so small that they can suspend in the liquid, and they have a certain color because they have a certain size. So I could show you vials of, and you probably have these pictures on your previous
I
stories on quantum dots, but like the different colored
yeah
vials,
yeah
those are all the same composition. They're just slightly different sized particles, and they can suspend in the liquid because they're so small.
it's still wild. Like it's it's fascinating to me, the color element of it. I mean, I guess that's something just superficially, like you don't have to know anything and just be like, whoa, that's wild, you know. But it is wild. Yeah, well, very interesting. I'm gonna have to re-listen to a few parts of this interview for sure. These parts to make sure I grasped everything right. But I'll just end with a fun one. Is I'm curious if watching Ant-Man and Wasp: Quantumania, if that's something that sort of drives you nuts because it's like, this is ridiculous, or you find it interesting that how they were able to discuss some of these kind of topics in a kind of fun, Hollywood way, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I love science fiction. I feel like we're, in our own way, we're like making science fiction reality with our technology. I mean, a lot of times they get out over their skis on like what's possible and what's not. I tend to like more hard sci-fi where it's based off of like the physics as we understand it. The thing that drives me nuts is like time travel. It's such
Yeah,
a
time
convenient
travel.
crutch in a narrative, like to be able to go back in time and whatever. As long as there's not time travel, I'm cool with it. Time travel backwards, forwards, fine. We're comfortable going forwards in time, I think. But nano and quantum, yeah, you can really. There's a lot of crazy things that can be possible from those fields. I think it's just the beginning of sort of figuring it out. Um,
Yeah, the
so
time travel
yeah.
stuff drives me nuts. I mean, it's just, but it's lasted forever. It's going to last forever because there's this human psychological element to it, and historical element where it's like, what if you could, you know? But
Mhm.
it's yeah. But I was just thinking about getting into those, like a quantum world, whatever. How you watching that, if you're like, oh, this is so ridiculous, this is so unrealistic here, or if you're like, wow, this is pretty cool how they how they integrated this concept into a movie about,
They
whatever.
call it suspension of disbelief. If the filmmaker does it right, you don't really pay too much attention to it. You kind of like give them a pass, and yeah, so it doesn't bother me. I get excited about that sort of stuff too.
Cool. Cool. You're cool. All right. That's good. That's good. I mean, I think either way, whether it drives you nuts or not, I'm just curious because it's obviously something that most of us can never really. We can watch it and enjoy it from a layman's perspective, but to watch it from someone who understands the quantum world, as you might say, would be fun. But yeah, so any final thoughts? Anything we missed, or you want to go back to, or I'll just thank you. It was really really interesting discussion. I mean, hopefully a lot of people thought so. I love when I'm like, when you're really expanding my knowledge base and even understanding some of the stuff First Solar does, which I thought I knew a lot about First Solar, but for me, really really mind opening and fun discussion.
Yeah, nothing really to add. I think we covered a lot. If folks are interested, they can engage with us on social media. We've got a relatively new website that has a lot of information and recent stories and stuff. I just say it's really an exciting time for nano and for quantum, and there's a lot coming down the pike of just new technologies and use cases, and happy to be a part of it in our own way. It's exciting to have been able to transition from an academic career into making products that actually create value, like for a farmer, like getting more
Yeah.
crops, it's just so cool. And
Yeah.
like for first, potentially generating extra gigawatts when you add it all up with our, because
Yeah.
of our technology I'm very passionate about having some impact on addressing climate change. And I guess my superpower, if I have one, is like in materials innovation. So just try to do my part to have an impact. And I think, we're an example of how materials innovation can have a big impact.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. And yeah, I imagine at one point when you're like able to look at how much you've increased gigawatt hour, production or of electricity or efficiency of systems, it'll be like a really rewarding, like, wow, look at what we've done. Just going from the
Definitely.
lab to this. So exciting stuff. Thanks a lot for joining us and talking about all this for almost an hour here. Thanks for your time. Hopefully a lot of other people enjoy. I'm sure they will. And keep us posted on how your relationship uh, goes with First Solar, how things move forward, and also in other realms. Even the agriculture stuff. That's still for us really a part of what we cover and are interested in because, like you
Cool.
said, you're maximizing efficiency of growing crops and um, all of that stuff. So very
Yeah, we'll
cool.
stay in touch. Thanks a lot, Zach. This was
Thanks.
fun. Talk soon.